Looks like it's time for oh ho. But where's the Armads refine? Oh ho?
Let the lesson begin.
What's up guys, Akariss here, bringing you another Fire Emblem Heroes video. Today's video is going to cover the weapon refines of April, obviously. First things first. Original Hector got Berserk Armads, that's good. What's weird is that he didn't get the original Armads Refine yet, and got the seasonal version first, despite that weapon not being a distant counter weapon, and all it has is QR. So I'm not really sure what's going on there, but yeah. Okay, so these are a pretty interesting batch of refines. I don't know if they're like the best or the worst. I just put them somewhere in the middle, and I'll hopefully give you guys some ideas how you can best use these units if you have them. Or potentially invest in them if that's your thing. So I'm going to go over every weapon and then a couple of sample builds. Remember the builds, you make do with what you have. You don't need to copy paste. You really got to consider your situations. No mythic blessings or legendary blessings. That all depends on what you're running, essentially to get you thinking and make an informed decision. So Berserk Armads here, basically I feel like brought him up to speed with like Lance Spectre in a way. Not exactly, but in a lot of ways he's really good. Of course, he's not removing penalties, and he still has an armor weakness. He's also green. So realistically, Spectre will be far more powerful, but this weapon is no slouch with a refine either. Specifically because you're very unlikely to miss kills. Like it's not happening. You're gonna basically get a bunch of kills and have great sustain power through that. So the first build that I actually want to take a look at is something like this. And again, you can pretty much use original Hector here. It doesn't have to be Valentine's Hector, wherever you have. Maybe the Resplendent Hector could work too. Okay, so first off, if you look at the weapon itself, its effect, you get healing on every special, plus you get tons of extra damage through the base like Wrath effect. So you're going to be securing kills pretty easily. If you don't have Lancina, Special Fighter is a great B, but an alternative to that will be using just Wrath and B as a sub option. I'm sure many of you don't have Far Save, but same idea applies here. Far Save is a great C skill, gives you extra stats and protects your allies. But it can always be subbed out for something like Attack Smoke or Pulse Smoke or whatever you have that's good for tanks. I do think Mystic Boost is good despite getting tons of healing through the special, and the reason for that is because healers become basically non-threats because of Mystic Boost. It gives you additional sustain, additional healing. Realistically, you probably will overheal with this weapon's special effect, but it's nice to just basically ignore all healers, all Veronicas, all Nanas, anything like that in the seal. If you feel like healers aren't really a problem, then I guess you could technically go with, I don't know, Distant Defense maybe, or even a solo or something like that. I still feel Mystic Boost is great though, and potentially you don't have to use an attack IV here. Something like a Res IV I think would be pretty solid, especially when you consider some AoE specials. No real chance to survive Legendary Lilina considering green and low res, but yeah. So it's a cool weapon, definitely a cool weapon. I'm not totally, I feel like it just made him better at his role, and he's now a potential good option, especially at low merges. Alright, next weapon we're going to talk about is the Gabolg. So this one is probably the downer of the batch, and considering he's a 5-star exclusive, that's unfortunate. This weapon is like, you get stats, I get stats, as long as you're like a sword, lance, axe, or cavalry, and that's really about it. The condition that it's within 3 spaces is cool, but whatever, man. Honestly, if you're going to use Quan, I guess the best way to do it would be to support another cavalry unit, and I feel the best place for this might be like Light Season. So similar to like Matilda supporting Freya, I think that Quan could also be a potential support candidate for Freya. If Freya is your carry unit in Light Season, for example, the Light Mythic, then Quan makes a decent support for that. Remember, this applies to cavalry allies. Other cavalries, like, you know, in general, like carries if you were to use, could potentially work with Quan as well. That's really the extent of a C of him, really. And Attack Defense 5 is pretty underwhelming to give to your allies. Really disappointing refine. You're not really getting much out of this, and it has these unnecessary restrictions as well. Alternatively, if you were excited about using Quan, then you could definitely try to use him as a carry, but that 18 res before buffs looks awful. So yeah, just fodder for rally speed defense. Can I get an F for Quan fans in the comments? Yeah. Yep. Yep. Alright, next up is Morgan. So Morgan is, I'd say, probably one of the better ones of this batch. Dude is really cool in terms of both the upgraded base effect and the refine effect. So he's essentially debuffing stuff and buffing himself within 4 spaces. Now that's not perfect by any means, because I feel like if you're running into teams that have high threat area, something like a Dancer Trap or ranged calves in the front line, you're not really going to use that effect easily. Teams that don't have high danger area, they're not really doing something on air offense, where you can potentially position him in a way to self-set him up for his refine effect. Realistically, I find the most consistency out of this weapon is to make sure you're running him side by side with units that use sabotage skills or Tamari or anything like that, so you don't have to rely on the base effect. And of course, just use standard buffs like tactics or links. But you know, the power of this is really strong because you're just debuffing your enemies and getting a bunch of stats, like a bunch of stats. So he becomes really potent. I don't have one covered here, an arena build, and honestly, our dual infantry 4 I don't feel makes him that much better. The base effect is nice for supporting, but I don't feel like it might be as good as something like, let's say, Tharja, who is probably going to have more throughput, definitely bigger nukes because of that blade effect, and also be able to support within 2 spaces away by lowering attack and speed. It's not bad. I think he could work as an R-dual infantry candidate, but again, I don't feel it was worth the coverage here. But really good weapon, really high potential, decent support capabilities, decent stat spread. Honestly, if you like him, you can use him successfully. Next up is Sumia, and I do actually think this is a really good refine, but probably on an underwhelming unit. So Flower Lance gives her Canto on the refine and an 80% Wings of Mercy with additional attack and speed, which she desperately needs, by the way, being a little bit outdated. Her base effect also generally has a fairly easy condition to meet of giving her 4 to all stats. Again, stats she definitely needs. So I feel like if you have a +1 Sumia, you can do some really cool things like that build shown here, which is you don't have to rely on Wings of Mercy on following up. You can rely on the weapons refine. And since the condition's at 80%, there's a lot of units that synergize with her, and she can be fairly self-sufficient. I think one of her best partners is basically Valoria to bring her down to a 2-charge Galeforce, and then you could like use Heavy Blade Dive Bomb, not worry about the attack condition effect, which she probably will meet if you run something like this, and obviously merges will help a lot. But she lines up very uniquely in like a great Galeforce team. I think if there's a place to use her, it's definitely Galeforce, because Canto makes, like, you kill something and you position your unit in a place that you can squish them, you can surround range units, and she lends super well to this. The fact that it's also an 80% HP condition is even better, because now you open up a wide pool of potential setups using Fury that'll bring a unit to 80%, and Sumia follows up no problem. I think this is definitely the most interesting refine of this batch. Alright, so finally we have Marisa's Shamshir. Sure, who knows? Marisa is another, I'd say, pretty big winner in this batch of refines, and that's because she's combining a slaying and Wodow effect, although I don't feel like the Wodow effect is that amazing here, but we'll talk about why it could still be good in a build like this, but also the refine effect and how that synergizes with potential builds or opportunities that Marisa can use. So for those of you that haven't basically foddered 10,000 copies of Infantry Pulse of Marisa, you could have a very good unit here, both as a potential carry or as a Galeforce follow-up, which we'll talk about in a moment. So I would call her like somewhat of a Navarre, but not exactly. And the reason I'd say is somewhat is because Navarre gets tons of special acceleration, whereas she gets a bit of special acceleration, but also gets a woe down, extra attack and speed. So it's like a mini Navarre, but not bad, and I'll tell you why. So if you wanted to use her as a carry, you can do that because the Wodow effect and plus the extra attack and speed she gets lends really well to using something like this build here. You would need Lancina or NY Valoria, I guess, to really maximize this potential, but you can definitely do something like this pre-buffs and she will work amazingly. Of course, if you don't want no follow-up, there's always alternatives to that, but I feel that one is generally the best option for both seasons. But here's where you can really get something going with a low merge version, is a Galeforce build. And yeah, this is kind of, weird because you have that Wodow effect and you're not really getting much out of Galeforce, but you got to remember, it's a slaying weapon, so it brings Galeforce to 4. You have that turn 1 reducing special cooldown even further, kind of like Times Pulse, I guess. So that would bring it to 3, Quick Impulse would bring it to 2, and then you have yourself a self-sufficient unit who can jump in on a Wings of Mercy opportunity and get that ball going. You could even further do this with Times Pulse on the sea, and then you don't even need any sort of special acceleration unless you're attacking into, I guess, guard units. But the fact that she comes with Infantry Pulse and has a high HP stat makes her actually lend really well to some Infantry Galeforce strategies without you actually having to invest very much. Of course, if you don't have Flashing Blade 4, you can just use Flashing Blade 3, for example. I mean, the difference between 3 and 4 is basically a bit of 5 damage. Let's be real, that's not a big difference. So I think for those of you that foddered tons of them and you want a cool Galeforce unit that isn't necessarily Navarre because you want someone who also accelerates others, this is really good. And again, between Marisa and Sumia, I think there's some clear winners of this batch, but I'm not excluding either Hector's or Morgan here either. Definitely Quan is the biggest loser of this refined batch, and that's a big F. But yeah, let's see what comes up next. I'm still waiting for, distant counter refines, budget 3-4 star healer refines. I really want to see those. And I guess dancers, especially like Dancing Azura, like the Axe seasonal, who I happen to have. So that's what I'm waiting for. But let me know what you guys think. Comments below, of course. Give video a thumbs up if you haven't already. Sub to the channel. And as always, I will see you guys in the next one. Much love. Peace.
It's over.